Hello and welcome to Why Wasn't It Better? I am your host, Patrick Darms.
I'm your co-host, Anton Paras.
We have a very special guest with us here today, Joe Darlington. Welcome.
Gentlemen, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to talk about this film with you guys.
Oh,
Ooh.
we're excited to have you. Now, if you're listening to this and you're a Bond fan, this man probably needs no introduction, but Joe, this is your opportunity. Please introduce yourselves. Feel free to plug anything you want.
Thank you, sir. Well, my name is Joseph Darlington. Some people know me as head of section, and I've been doing the Being James Bond podcast for 18 years, I think. If it's not 18, it's very close to 18. So yeah, a long time. So I kind of enjoy being the OG of the James Bond podcasting world. So yeah, kind of a long time James Bond geek. Again, very happy to talk about this film with you guys.
Best reasons.
Yep.
18 years. That's
Yeah.
almost, you had to have been one of the first Bond podcasters, right?
Honestly, not only was I one of the first Bond podcasters, but really kind of one of the first podcasters in general. I mean, I think I started doing that. I only really became aware of what podcasts were, not that long before I started. I had a buddy who was, a little more tech savvy than me, and he was doing a gaming podcast. So he kind of pulled me in because the From Russia with Love video game had just come out. This is how far back we're going.
Okay.
And
Yep, I
kind of
played
got
it.
hooked.
I played it.
Yeah. So I started doing the Being James Bond podcast early on. There was I think there was only honestly one other Bond podcast that was going on at the time, and year or two later they kind of petered out. So yeah, I kind of won the title of being the oldest Bond podcast, and all I had to do was not completely stop podcasting, and I'm able to hold that title.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, so you were podcasting during the early iTunes days then?
Yeah, literally.
Yeah. Love that.
I literally had to create my own RSS feed, from scratch and upload it to be able to do. Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, there weren't even services now that you just post your podcast to, you tell it, put in your description and you're good to go. You had to do everything by hand. It was crazy.
Yeah, we're super spoiled now.
Yeah, same here. Honestly, it is wonderful too. I mean, I love being able to put something up, schedule it for a couple days later, walk away. Yeah, it's good stuff. But yeah, and it's still. I love that podcasting has really kind of. Everyone knows now what a podcast is. It's not just for the kind of, you don't have to be like an uber nerd to really know what it is now. It's pretty mainstream, so it's kind of cool.
I feel like it's overtaken music for a lot of people I know.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Honestly, I think I'm constantly listening to podcasts. Driving, lunch hours, that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm listening to podcasts way more than music. It's almost kind of an exception to the rule that I'm actually listening to music these days.
Well, we're super excited to have you on today. Are there any upcoming projects that you want to plug as well?
Sure. I mean, I'm sort of back working on, I don't know if you know, but I had a book out several years ago, and for years the big question has been, when are you going to do another one? And like everything else, I'm sure you guys feel my pain when I say that everything, it was a wonderful time. The lockdowns, I wouldn't wish them on anybody again, but they were a great time for putting out content. We just had the time to do it, so it was good stuff. And once that kind of went away, it was almost like the extreme opposite, where it was like now we're just dying, because we're all busy and back to work and back in the office, all that stuff. So, but now I'm kind of, my schedule is sort of leveled off again. So I am kind of hard at work working on. I'm going to redo the first book because now it's so old. I desperately needed it to update it, and also the second book. So that'll all be out this year. And yeah, just back to putting out content again. I'll do some more YouTube videos and more regular podcasting again this year. So 2025 should be a pretty good year for content from Being James Bond.
Love it.
Well, you heard it here, listeners, and I'm hoping that we have some of Joe's longtime listeners here too with Why Wasn't It Better? So with that, thank you again, Joe.
You're very welcome. Thank you guys, honestly.
Hopefully at some point in 2025 we get the news we all want, which is When's the next Bond movie coming?
Yeah.
Hopefully, who is the next Bond? That's another question.
Yeah, it's been dry, hasn't it? It's gotten so bad that the lack of news on the new Bond has become news itself. I'm seeing like mainstream stories asking the question like, what is going on? Like, are they doing more James Bond or are they not? You know, so it's pretty dry. It's pretty barren as far as news goes. So this is luckily we got podcasts like these to keep us keep us going in between.
We do. Amazon, get your shit together if you're listening.
Right.
So, Anton, I told you early in the days of this podcast, whenever we get to License to Kill, there's one guest we need to get. And it was this man. So the film that we're talking about today is License to Kill. I'll intro this for us. Quote, James Bond is out on his own and out for revenge, end quote. The 17th official James Bond film was Timothy Dalton's second and final entry in this series. 007 relinquishes his license to kill, disobeys orders, and goes on a mission of revenge when his best friend, Felix Leiter's wife, is killed by a drug baron and Felix himself is brutally maimed. A beautiful CIA pilot flies him to Sanchez's South American, or I should say Central American headquarters. Disguised as a hitman, Bond is hired by the villainous drug dealer. Released on July 14th, 1989 by Eon Productions and United Artists. Directed by John Glenn, screenplay by Richard Maybaum and Michael G. Wilson, starring Timothy Dalton, Robert Davi, Carrie Lowell, Talisa Soto, Anthony Zerbe, David Hedison, Desmond Llewellyn, Frank McRae, Everett McGill, and Benicio del Toro. The budget was $32 million, adjusted for inflation that is $85 million, and the box office was $156 million, adjusted for inflation that is $392 million. Joe, as today's guest, everyone who knows you should know this by now, but what was it about License to Kill that made you immediately agree to appearing on this episode?
License to Kill has always been sort of a fascinating one for me. In fact, this is the one film where I decided to do like a deep dive into this film and really kind of get into why I think it doesn't work. So again, this is the perfect place for me to be talking to you guys about this. It's an interesting one because you can really pick apart the things that kind of go wrong with it. There are some Bond films like A View to a Kill comes to mind. A View to a Kill is a film that I know I shouldn't like it. I know that it's kind of not doing any of the things that a Bond film should be doing, yet somehow it's grown on me, and I sort of can't, I just like it. I warm up to it for some reason. This one's sort of the opposite of that, where I want to like this movie. I really do want to like this one, and I just can't get there, because there's just so many things going on in this film that just sort of scream to me that it's kind of a low budget sort of film. It's trying something new, but it's not trying hard enough. Yeah, but to your point, a lot of fans really do respond to this one. I don't quite get why. I think people appreciate it more for what it's trying to do than what it actually succeeds in doing. So yeah, for me, it's a swing and a miss.
I'm with you. It seems like we're in the minority from what I've read online and what I've heard in real life. Did you see this in the theater?
I did. Not only did I see it in the theater, but I remember this. I actually saw this at a drive-in. I'm in one of the areas, we still have a drive-in theater that's, I think to this day, is still in operation. So I did catch it in a drive-in. But yeah, I did. And ironically, I was actually a fan of Dalton. I still say that Dalton is one of the best James Bonds. I mean, he's terrific. So, but yeah, I did see it at the time. I was kind of excited for it, and then it just kind of was what it was.
So your opinion of this has remained constant over the years, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. And again, I part of me wonders if I'm being a little unfair, because I mean, if you remember, this was 1989, and this was a summer of like some pretty hard-hitting blockbuster movies.
We're going to talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I kind of felt like maybe I'm comparing this to the other things that came out this year. But again, after many, many years since, that I kind of look back on it and have had plenty of time to have a change of heart for it. It's just, still to this day, it seems flat. There's so many different little elements about it that don't pan out and don't really turn into anything. All the settings are weak for me. A lot of people involved are just kind of flat. It really does feel like a made-for-TV movie. Like
Yes.
I mean, even an average
100%.
You know what I mean? I'll tell you honestly, even an average. A lot of people say this is like the Miami Vice James Bond, which I kind of agree with. But on the other hand, I go, I could watch Miami Vice, and I think even those episodes are better looking than this film is. This film there's a lot of sets that are shot in, really boring indoor stages and stuff. And honestly, like there's whole scenes like this. There's scenes in them, and I'm gonna jump too far ahead, but like there's one scene in particular where Talisa Soto's character shows up at the hotel room, and Q and Gary Lowell are there.
That whole dialogue.
I love James so much.
Yeah, I mean it's so painful to watch, and there's like nothing about that. Like the camera placement is boring. The room they're in is boring. And Q is just sort of sitting there fiddling with something when she comes in. I mean, you just after a while you're like, wow, this whole movie is really kind of flat and flavorless. There's not a lot to it.
We're going to talk about it later. Inflation hit this series hard by the late 80s because this had the same budget as Moonraker. And whatever you want to say about Moonraker, I don't think it's great. It's a great looking film.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, that one delivers. It's a lot of things, but it's certainly not a lazy movie. I mean, they're there to entertain, and they're throwing everything plus the kitchen sink at you. This one, you sort of look at it and you say, where's the budget going? Because I can tell you where it's not going. Yeah, and it's frustrating because this is the kind of movie that really should have worked. I think they were the idea was there, but it just doesn't pan out.
It's definitely an outlier in the series. My theory on why a lot of people like it is just that, because it's pretty dissimilar from anything else. The revenge plot, I think, is enticing. And to your point, it's a great concept.
Yeah, they're trying to do something that's edgy and different. So yeah, hats off to that. But then you sort of see that they're like, just for example, the whole premise kind of hinges on the idea that James Bond and Felix Leiter are really they're BFFs, and nobody's gonna mess with James Bond's best pal. But then you say to yourself, but you did really though? I mean, I don't think Felix Leiter went off on a rampage of revenge when Bond's wife got killed.
Wasn't even at the wedding.
It wasn't even at the wedding, and it's so they're trying to sort of backtrack a little bit or retcon, to sort of make it seem like these two are really that tight that he would do this. And I get that there's also, I mean, you could make the argument that there's some subtext in here because James Bond, and they do reference it in the film. So, good job there. James Bond himself was married, so he knows what he went through. So he understands what Felix is going through. He was very friendly with the wife. You might even say over friendly.
Yes,
in certain parts.
Which
I have a question about that later.
By the way, I think that's a tradition in some countries. So
in Key West,
I don't know.
Just make out with the bride if you're the best man. Sure,
right? I mean, there's almost, it's a little creepy because you sort of. I guess Bond has to be the guy, and you can't have anyone upstage him. Yet, I almost feel like there's a subtle inference that she was all about James Bond and couldn't get him, so had to settle for Felix. It's almost a little throuple-ish for me, and I don't.
Yeah, it's a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, seriously, like, dude, the husband is in the next room. Can you calm down a little bit?
Some quick notes. I mean, you were mentioning this came out in a particularly big summer for movies, which is in some ways, I don't know, has been equaled. I'm sure, younger viewers will write in and tell me how I'm wrong, that 1989 is nothing compared to 2015. Right. But this really underperformed at the box office, which we'll talk about a little bit later. It's no coincidence since the last Bond movie released in the summer, it was seen as a disappointment by the studio. It wasn't supposed to be Dalton's final film. I think all of us are in agreement. We wish he had gotten a third. He deserved it. I mean, I don't think his acting is the problem with this movie.
No, definitely not. I mean, you could make the case that, and I have before, that I think that they kind of doubled down a little too hard on the edginess of Dalton. Like I always thought when they first chose him, I remember feeling like he was a great pick, but he was kind of he was a hardcore serious actor. You know, and I always joke. I said, you know, people say like, well, how did you know about Timothy Dalton before James Bond? Because of all his theatrical work and all the Shakespearean things. Come on, it was Flash Gordon. We all let's be real. But he seemed like a guy who was very serious and took his craft very seriously. So I thought the fact that they seemed to soften him up just enough for The Living Daylights, I thought was sort of the perfect cocktail. They got him right. And this time around, now they wanted to go for a hardcore, edgy James Bond, you know, so he kind of, you know, he looks a little too serious. The hair is all slicked back, looking like Dracula. So, and I thought it was, I mean, to the point where it was, and he's just sort of grumpy throughout the whole thing, which in the context of the story makes sense, but your average film goer might not respond to that necessarily. So, but yeah, no, but with that said, I think Dalton is a fantastic James Bond. So yeah, but you're right. To your point though, the film really does, it really did underperform, and it's kind of a tragedy because I think throughout the earlier 80s, I think Bond was always in kind of usually the top 3, you know, of films for that year. It always did gangbusters, and I think this time around it didn't even hit the top 5. But
I have a stat for you. It was like the 30th highest grossing film in North America.
Yeah.
So, that is. I mean, it just got blown away by the competition.
It really did, and you could kind of understand it. There were so many things that came out that year that were they're not like, this was sort of before, like right now everything that's in the top 5 for the year, everything is either a remake, it's a sequel, it's something, you know what I mean? A reimagining of something else. That year, I mean, most of the stuff that was out, I think most of them were pretty new. Like, I know Last Crusade was definitely one of them. That was out that year. That was a big one. Batman obviously was
gigantic.
The
big one, Batman.
Yeah, I mean, and it was so, you want to talk about marketing? I mean, that film was so hyped up. So yeah, there was a lot of things that James Bond wasn't even going to get close that year. So kind of unfair, but I think a better film obviously would have done better.
For sure. And then, of course, in the next episode, Anton, when we talk GoldenEye eventually, we're going to talk about the legal battle that led to the delay, the 6-year delay, which I think in some ways is unfairly held against Dalton by those who aren't familiar with it. But, you know, we'll get into that. Let's talk the production history of this real quick. We'll breeze through this. And, Joe, if you know anything we don't, because I know you're an expert here, feel free to jump in. So shortly after the release of The Living Daylights, Cubby Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson, they started developing the next film. They wanted a place where the series had not yet visited. China was visited after an invitation by the government. They talked about a chase sequence along the Great Wall, as well as a fight scene amongst the Terracotta Army. Wilson wrote some outlines about a drug lord in the Golden Triangle before the plans fell through because Broccoli's concerns that the Chinese government would censor the script. In 1985, the Films Act in the UK was passed, moving the Edie Levy, I'm assuming that's how that's pronounced, resulting in foreign artists being taxed more heavily. Because of this, in order to save money, and we'll talk about the impact of this later, License to Kill became the first film shot entirely outside of the UK. Wilson and Richard Maibaum brought a new treatment. Before they could develop the script, the Writers Guild went on strike, and Maibaum was unable to continue writing, leaving Wilson to work on the script on his own. Although the main plot and title of License to Kill are entirely original, there are elements from Fleming's writing that are used throughout the story, including a number of aspects of the short story The Hildebrand Rarity, Milton Crest being the character from that. Felix Leiter's mauling by a shark was based on the novel Live and Let Die. And then Destruction from Within aspect is based on the Man with the Golden Gun novel. The original title was License Revoked. Wilson compared the script to Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, where a samurai, quote, without any attacking of the villain or its cohorts, only sowing the seeds of distrust, he manages to have the villain bring himself down, end quote. Wilson created the Republic of Isthmus, a banana republic based on Panama, with the pockmarked Sanchez bearing similarities to General Manuel Noriega. The script was not ready by the time casting had begun, and Carrie Lowell auditioned with lines from A View to a Kill. Robert Davi was cast following a suggestion by Barbara Broccoli and screenwriter Richard Maibaum. David Hedison returned to play Felix Leiter 16 years after playing the character in Live and Let Die. He didn't expect to return, saying, quote, I was sure Live and Let Die would be my first and last, end quote. And director John Glenn was reluctant to cast the 61-year-old actor, since the role included a scene of parachuting. I don't blame him.
So up-and-coming actor Benicio del Toro was chosen to play Sanchez's henchman, Dario, for being, quote, laid back while menacing in a quirky sort of way. Wayne Newton got the role of Professor Joe Butcher after sending a letter to the producers expressing interest in a cameo because he always wanted to be in a Bond film. Pat, you said it best through text. That was a choice. Principal photography lasted from July to November 1988 on location in Mexico and Key West, Florida. Interiors were filmed at Estudios Churubusco instead of Pinewood Studios. Big mistake there. The crew arrived at the studio in Mexico City only to discover it in a state of disrepair. A chunk of the budget was allocated to fixing it up. For the climactic tanker chase, the producers used an entire section of the Mexican Federal Highway in La Rumorosa, Baja California, which had been closed for safety reasons. Initially, Vic Flick, who had played lead guitar on Monty Norman's original 007 theme, and Eric Clapton were asked to write and perform the theme song. But the producers turned it down, and instead Gladys Knight's song and performance was chosen. John Barry was going to return, but became unavailable after getting throat surgery. The score ended up being composed by Michael Kamen. Several months before the film's release, the title was changed from License Revoked to License to Kill, after the studio became concerned that American audiences would confuse it with the withdrawal of a driver's license. Nearly all the promotional material had to be changed. And because of the increased violence, License to Kill became the first Bond film to receive a PG-13 rating from the MPAA's ratings board, a rating that had been applied to every Bond film since. In the UK, it received a 15 rating similar to R in the US, and it sits at an 80% Rotten Tomato score. License to Kill. Well, we've gone through the production history. We clearly have a lot of feelings that are simmering at the surface. Why don't we go ahead and dig in? Our first reason, Pat, why wasn't License to Kill better?
I think we have to start with the writing, the story. This has always been, to me, the most Americanized James Bond film. I don't think that's a good thing. You know, one of the things I think everyone loves about Bond is how quintessentially British it is. This exists pretty far outside of the traditional Bond formula. I know it has some elements that are faithful to Fleming's writing. I get that. I don't mind something trying to be an outlier. Like On Her Majesty's Secret Service is an outlier, I think, for the series. And I respect what they were trying to do here. It's something different. They were taking a swing. But for me, I just don't like what this film is doing. Joe, the way I see it is this just has way too many 80s stereotypes in it. There's a lot of... I tried to write down everything, and it's a square peg, round hole. Like, this feels like a lot of the cowboy cop 1980s action movie trope trying to do James Bond, and I don't think it works well together for the series.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. It's a combination of all of those things, and I totally agree with you. It gives it this vibe that, to your point, it's the revenge film. It's basically like a Lethal Weapon type movie. You know, I think James Bond, you know, and again, you could say this about a lot of the James Bond films, that at some point the series starts following popular trends as opposed to setting the trends. I would argue that the first 4 or 5 Bond films, you know, are pure James Bond. That's what James Bond is all about. After that, throughout the Roger Moore years, I mean, they start to feel like Woody Allen films in terms of, like, you know, let's go after a certain genre and, you know, see what we can do with it. And this is very much the same way. It feels like Lethal Weapon all over again. You mentioned that John Barry doesn't do the score. Michael Kamen does the score. He had done Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, so that sound was very familiar at that point. To your point also, it is a very American feeling James Bond film. It does not have that British feel. Even when like the whole thing starts off in Key West, I mean the thing takes place in America. And from there, they go to a fictional city of Isthmus. This must be my lucky day. And that always rubbed me wrong too. I always felt like James Bond goes to places. He goes to countries that exist. But yeah, and again, the Bond girl is American. A lot of the characters in here are American, so it does feel very kind of flat, and it does lose that that wonderful posh flavor of being a jet setter, going to different countries, et cetera, getting the local flavor of those places. This one's just kind of, again, adding to the overall feeling that the whole thing just doesn't, it's not very impressive, sort of.
Anton, I wrote all these down as I was watching this. Cowboy cop trope, revenge plot, South Florida / Latin American setting, a drug lord bad guy, a roadhouse bar fight, members only jackets, a televangelist, a Michael Kamen score that he straight jacked from Die Hard. Every time I watch this movie, I forget ninjas show up at one point. Yeah. Like, how many 80s things can we just shove into this movie? I'm amazed Bond wasn't driving a DeLorean at one point.
No, I mean, really, really good call, guys. And I feel like we talked about how in '89 it went up against a lot of really big competition in terms of contemporary action films at the time. I think hitting the nail on the head in terms of who or what films and trends really influenced Bond, especially during that Roger Moore era, going even into Timothy Dalton. You had Die Hard in '88, and that definitely caught the attention of studio executives all across Hollywood, and you can see that influence definitely in this one. So you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and say ninjas were par for the course.
It had kind of, that was the thing. They're running behind to try to catch up with something and not even doing it as well. So it was almost like there was no way this film was really going to add up to a whole lot, because they're chasing these trends that have already been done. And I kind of feel like we were coming off a pretty interesting. I mentioned earlier that a lot of the films that they were going up against, a lot of them were pretty fresh and original. And I would even take that and go back the last few years and say, we had things. We were, Lethal Weapon, I think, kind of redefined buddy cop film and was doing it better than ever.
Yeah.
Die Hard was redefining the action film. Honestly,
Batman was a watershed.
Yeah, honestly. There was so much that was coming out at that time that was so fresh. So I kind of feel like Bond was already fighting an uphill battle to try to sort of stay relevant. And you're not going to do it by just aping the other things that are popular and trying to sort of pawn it off as your own.
It's interesting how, if you're looking at the totality of the Bond series, we get Bond going off on a revenge mission to essentially avenge Felix and Della, right? And he gets a whole movie to do it. We never got that for Tracy. Like, Diamonds Are Forever, like, that doesn't count. There's
right.
There's no way that was a revenge plot. Like, so this movie always rubbed me the wrong way. I'm like, why does Felix and his wife get this revenge thing, but we never got it for Tracy?
I mean, I'd argue why address it in that same way is because that concept is compelling, of Bond wanting to address that, right? Now, do you feel like perhaps with a different setting, different villain, this could have been executed better?
I don't think the villain is the problem. I would argue that the villain is pretty good.
Oh, Davi's great.
Yeah, I mean, he knocks it out of the park. I appreciate that there's sort of, when you talk about Yojimbo and how they're trying to sort of bring in that kind of story where you're pitting the enemies against each other. I feel like there's a dusting of that, but I don't really feel like they're taking advantage of that enough. It's almost like you really have to read between the lines to even get that was what he was doing. There's scenes where you have Bond talking to Sanchez and trying to get into into have him take him into his confidence and starts pointing little fingers at other guys, and it almost gets to the point where it's like there's a wonderful scene when Bond wakes up in Sanchez's house, and it's a beautiful mansion, and he goes downstairs, and the two of them are having coffee and smoking a cigarette, and you see Bond laying the groundwork for this, where he's talking about the other guys, and are you sure they weren't involved, that kind of thing. And there's a part of me that kind of goes, why didn't Bond just jump across the table and choke this guy? What? Why
Just
are we
kill him.
going to? Right. I mean, Bond could probably take this guy out with no problem. I mean, he is an assassin. I'm sure you have a lot of ways you could kill a guy with your bare hands. Why not just choke this guy? Like, he's sitting right there. So it's almost like you have to ask yourself, what was the bigger thing he was trying to do? If it's a revenge plot, then just do that.
To answer your question, Anton, I think if this film had better writing, it could have worked. I'll give you a perfect example of. We'll get to the plot holes in the next reason, but Joe, have you read the continuation Bond novel Carte Blanche?
I probably did. It's probably sitting right next to me, but don't quote me on anything because I don't remember. A lot of those continuation novels blend together.
Memory. So there's a section of that book where Bond goes undercover working for the villain of the story. And one of the things the villain does is he can't completely trust Bond, so he basically stages a mock execution, and he has Bond execute a guy, like kill him in cold blood. I wish there was something like that in this film, where the idea of Bond infiltrating Sanchez's organization and destroying it from within, that is a great concept. But nothing interesting happens in it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. Interesting, the Man with the Golden Gun, the novel, which bears little resemblance to the actual film, that has sort of a similar thing where Bond is trying to. He's kind of a mercenary for hire, and he's hired by the bad guy, and the bad guy can't tell if he trusts Bond or not, etc. Yeah, you're absolutely right. They don't use that. They don't capitalize on that in this, and honestly, one of the frustrations that I have is that he seems to get very easily. Sanchez takes him in and doesn't really question him, and honestly, it's one of those things where if you really start to pick it apart, it doesn't stand up to a lot of scrutiny. I mean, for example,
no.
Bond shows up. Well, first off, everyone else in Sanchez's organization has seen James Bond. Like, literally, he has run-ins with every single one of them at some point in some way, and not one of them ever really puts the pieces together and says, I think that guy might be the guy who's causing all this problem.
Dario's just missing from an hour of the film for whatever reason.
Exactly. He just shows up when we need him to show up, and we're ready to get into the climax. I mean, honestly, Bond infiltrates Milton Crest's the whole drug deal that was going on there with the little submarine under the boat, all that stuff. And then he literally flies off with Sanchez's money, like $5 million of his money. A day or two later, he shows up in the city, goes to the bank, and opens up an account for $5 million.
And they know about it.
Right. And they're looking at him on the monitor saying that guy just opened up an account at the bank for $5 million. Not one person goes, hey, wait a second. Didn't we just lose $5 million? Like, almost, I mean, honest to God, I mean, like, almost to the penny. Like, he just walks in with stacks of suitcases that is obviously the money that he stole, and not once does somebody go, wait a second, that's the exact amount we just lost. So, there was a lot of different avenues they could have gone down to at least have Sanchez question James Bond and say, hey, wait a second. And that's where you could have got some serious tension, If
you're going to have Bond go rogue, like, one of the things, I don't love Quantum of Solace, but I like it more than this film because Bond just goes completely rogue in that movie. In here, he still gets stuff from Q. Like, we still have that element of it that he's not completely rogue because Q shows up to help him. Like, one of the things I have when we get to the plot holes is, what was Bond's plan to get at Sanchez if Q hadn't shown up and given him all the gadgets?
Yes. Thank you. Honestly, that drives me crazy too. He literally shows up with these gadgets, and again, kind of weird gadgets. See, I mean, that also speaks to, it speaks to the plot holes that like you said, Bond literally didn't go to the trouble to score a rifle anywhere. So unless Q happened to show up, what was his plan of attack? But it also speaks to the tone of the film, because I feel like when Q shows up, and the gadgets are like, oh, the dentonite toothpaste and all this. It's like wacky packages, like it all of a sudden that's where I feel like the film starts to kind of get cold feet. You know what I mean? And it's like, this is supposed to be a cold revenge drama, but we're gonna have to bring in Q to have some lighter moments, so we can have a couple chuckles along the way. And it's like, well, okay, I get that, but again, what's the focus of the film? You need to sort of create a style and kind of stick with it, and they don't seem to want to do that.
One of the things I've often heard about this film is like, well, it's very Fleming-esque, right? It's very faithful to Fleming. And the thing that always bothered me the most about this film, Anton, I was texting this to you earlier today, how they chose to write Bond here. And the thing, this bothers me more than anything else about the film. This is my biggest problem with it. And I don't think it's a small nit to pick. I think it's pretty significant for the characterization of Bond, not just in this film, but overall through the whole series. His actions in this film not only get Britain's MI6 representative in Isthmus killed, he gets the entire Hong Kong narcotics squad killed. Hong Kong was still a British colony in 1989. So he gets multiple fellow countrymen killed. Like, does he care? Does it bother him? He never reflects on it. He doesn't face any consequences from it. There's nothing that I have seen in all of the films leading up to this that would lead me to believe this James Bond would do something like this.
Yeah, I mean, from a characterization standpoint, Pat, I totally agree with you. It just doesn't seem right. But at the same time, this film does not have the capacity for that level of nuance and story writing.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. And Pat, to your point, honestly, I've made the same argument myself in that entire operation, I mean, there's an entire operation happening to take down Sanchez, and Bond shows up, ruins that entire operation, and gets them all killed. You're right. And then in the next scene, he's chilling out with Sanchez drinking coffee like nothing happened. And right. And then it sort of begs the question, when all is said and done, was Bond's revenge mission really worth all of that? I mean, getting all of those people killed, all the work that they had put into trying to take out Sanchez legally, etc. He just kind of said, yeah, no, I'm going to do this thing, and my thing is more important. And yeah, to your point, by the time they get to the end, it's like, hey, I think M might have a job for you. Really?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Chipper Felix Leiter.
Yeah, I mean, honest to God, hey Felix, remember your wife? And honest, there's even, I'll take it a step further, but the scene with Felix, they show him in the hospital bed, and the nurse is kind of propping up some pillows behind him, and he's smiling at her, and almost kind of like there's a subtle little implication that Felix has kind of already moved on.
Does he know at that point? Like, has anyone told him what happened to his wife?
I'm sure. Well, I mean, the bad guys literally said, we gave your wife a nice honeymoon, and
Jeez.
right? I mean,
God, that ending is so bad.
It's almost. I mean, it's almost like they just didn't know how to wrap things up. At some point, they're like, let's just do this truck chase and just get this thing done, because we don't know. Like you said, Dario shows up, he's exposed. Let's have the climax, and then we need to just wrap this up and be done. They really didn't see it through to the end.
I haven't found anything to confirm this, but I always thought they just ran out of money.
It does feel that way, doesn't it? I wouldn't doubt it. Diamonds Are Forever is another one that has similar problem, right? Where they just, you can tell that money just, the money just ran out, and it's like, all right, we need to wrap this thing up.
Well, we know that for a fact. They didn't want to pay Connery that overage, and they were like, we're done here. Blofeld doesn't matter what happens to him.
Right, exactly.
So I own the novelization to this. The novelization written by John Gardner, it at least is intelligent enough to have Bond express extreme regret for getting the Hong Kong folks killed. At least someone who worked on this was thinking about it.
Yeah, and I've heard really good things about that book too. I should really, it's interesting. I've never, around that era, they did novelizations of those films, which was sort of strange, because it's like that's how you knew they ran out of actual Fleming material, because I mean, these are now books that are based on movies that were based on books. But yeah, I've heard very good things about this one, and there's an interesting little problem with that too, is that Gardner, he's still trying to write within the Fleming universe, so
Yes.
Felix got maimed a second time by sharks.
Yes, it's really awkward, and the chapter is called "Lightning Does Strike Twice."
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's one of those things. Spielberg used to say sometimes you paint yourself into a corner, and all you can do is just run so quickly through the wet paint that you hope nobody sees your footsteps. I guess that's what this is there.
It is. I think this film could have been slightly saved somewhat. There's no reconciliation with M, which to me is unforgivable.
Yeah, that is tricky. Well, it's again to your point earlier about how kind of Americanized this film is. I mean, it's weird how little we see M or Moneypenny in the film. Moneypenny, I mean, she must have just gone in for like an afternoon and filmed everything she needed to film, and
Just
they
the
called
one
it a day.
scene, right? Pretty much.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, she's and it's a couple of seconds really. Em at least gets one or two. Like he does that scene where he goes to see Bond in Key West, and Bond resigns and runs off
Wearing a 3-piece suit in Key West. That's
yeah, right. Yeah, seriously. Like, I guess you could break character a little bit. It is.
Jeez.
Yeah. So yeah, to your point. I mean, honestly, it is difficult to rectify how this all he goes rogue, does all this stuff. I mean, he like you again. He could not have screwed this up worse. To your point is like he gets his own people killed. He gets Hong Kong agents and his own guy killed with his antics. And we're just gonna kind of fine, no problem. We're sure you had good reason to do what you did, so we'll just kind of look the other way and forget it all. Yeah, it's a tough one when you can't think about this one at all, or else it just falls apart.
Also about the sorry, Anton, I know you have something to say. Really quick, I just want to add. It always struck me too is they forgot to kill Lupe off because at the end he just pimps her out to the president of Isthmus.
Yeah.
He's just like, oh yeah, you're still in the film,
right?
Why don't you hang out with him? He's rich.
Exactly. I mean, it is weird. I mean, again, they tried to prop this thing up like it was some sort of love triangle, between the Bond and the two girls, and it's like, guys, come on. Plan it out.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say there's clearly an awareness in terms of Dalton's ability to provide more gravitas as a Shakespearean actor, bring a bit more seriousness to the gravity to the role. But I feel like in terms of the story, they're just, with all of the examples, there's just a bit of a contradiction. And with that, the tone feels a little all over the place because of those contradictions. And I feel like the sentiment is still there. I do get it. And I feel like that's why I can see a lot of people still liking it, because of this very grounded sense of Bond on a revenge mission. And like you said, Pat, we see it in a better way, at least in Quantum of Solace. Not perfect by any means, but I do feel like that sentiment is still so compelling. That storyline is still so compelling, especially that hasn't been resolved since Her Majesty's Secret Service. So
I totally agree with you, Anton. Like, I don't love Quantum of Solace, but it is tonally consistent. It's dour from start to finish. Now, is that my cup of tea? Not necessarily. Also affected by a writer's strike. No coincidence, right? But this one, the revenge plot is dark. It is gritty, but we also get stuff like the goofball Roadhouse bar fight, which reminded me of Airplane.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that don't, like, when Pam uses her shotgun to shoot like a pizza-sized hole in the wall of that bar?
Yeah.
That is something straight out of Moonraker. Like, that does not belong in this film.
That's out of the 1966 Batman movie.
Yeah, and look,
Yes, it is.
On paper, I get it. I'm sure, like, I've been thinking about this more and more, whether it's like dialogue that we hear on screen that's delivered, and on paper it could always just be, sometimes dialogue can seem flat. It always depends on the actor's delivery to really provide the color to the dialogue to make it feel real. And it's the same thing with set pieces, the way the action is executed. Huge factors are going to be the budget involved, the timing of the shoot. And I feel like for this particular film, there was a lot of ideas around, hey, like, we can make this look really cool. These are the trends. but also we don't have a huge budget, so we just kind of have to shoot this quick. And it's very clear on the screen the production was very poor.
Anton, to your point, I think you're spot on, and I think it goes back. I think that sort of sums up my core issues with this film, whereas I feel like if I'm always looking at this film and judging it based on two criteria. One is the intent, and the other is the execution. And I feel like this is probably the best example in the series where those two things are just diametrically opposed to each other. The intent is there, it's good, it makes sense. I get it. I get what they want to do, and then there's the actual execution, which just on every level to me just does not match up. They're just two different things. They want to do something one way. They want to sort of go down this road, yet somehow they just drop the ball every single time, or they just don't execute it the right way. And Pat, to your point, seriously, the Roadhouse bar fight. I mean, honestly, this you want to talk about? It's a movie that wants to be serious, wants to be taken seriously. Yet we trip over the worst cliche in the world. Whereas if somebody throws a punch in a bar, everyone in the bar just stands up and starts punching the guy next to them. Like this big giant brawl breaks out. Where people are just bashing bottles over each other's heads and whatever.
It really reminded me of Airplane.
Seriously.
Yep.
And the same thing, right? Like, what is Wayne Newton's character doing in this film?
Right? Yeah. Yes.
So weird.
That confused my wife the most when we were watching it. She's like, "Is that Wayne Newton?" I'm like, "Yeah." She's like, why is he in this?" I'm like, I don't know.
Right. Well, I mean, that was late '80s commentary, because this was the era of Jim Bakker and all these TV evangelists that was sort of like, they were popular for a little bit, but the downfall was big news, and everybody was sort of fascinated with these weird stories about weirdo televangelists. So of course they throw him in there. But yeah, I mean, does that feel like a James Bond movie to you, to have a weird televangelist in there? Honestly, I thought, like, the idea that they turned it into this sort of con was clever, but again, it just doesn't feel like Bond to me.
Can you explain how he's setting the cocaine prices?
What was it? 500. A pledge of 500 was equal to 500 pounds. Is that right?
It would be kilos, like
kilos. Yeah.
It was like in the as far as the televangelist viewers were concerned, this is the goal we're trying to reach for tonight. It was like 8 million or something or other, but really that was them setting the price for the, what the cocaine was going to cost or something or other. But
I've
honestly,
seen this movie 20 times and I still don't understand it.
The conspiracy of running money laundering through a just very on the nose, more innocent pledge drive. I think that I can see the intent, right? Joe, you said it best. There's that intent and execution. And I feel like there is a want to see how these conspiracies are also tied to American culture, just because of it was so big back then. And I feel like this is more of that lens into American culture, but with a backdrop of James Bond, which I think is just another reason why this didn't do well. Is it should have been flipped. It should have been more of a Bond lens into American culture.
Just you wait, Anton, because televangelism would affect another 89 movie that we're recording later this week, Star Trek V, The Final Frontier.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, I could say that.
And then we have, Joe, you've spoken at length of this before in some of your content, like the characterization of Q in this film. There is nothing previously established about Q that would lead us to believe he would do this. He would go out and onto a rogue mission and assist 007.
Right. Yeah. I mean, quite the opposite. If anybody was going to steer clear of this, it would have been him. That's a total 180 reversal of that character. He's always stuffy and grumpy because James Bond, he doesn't do things by the book like Q does. And then suddenly it's like, oh yeah, James Bond decided to quit and go on a tear of revenge where he's going to go murder some rando. I'm down with that. I'm free. I got nothing going on. Yeah, that really doesn't work. And not only that, not only does it sort of bastardize the Q character, but it also it robbed them of a good opportunity to bring in another character. I mean, like, I think some of the best Bond movies have that, where Bond, whether it's Draco or Columbo, or Bond is out in the field and he has to sort of ally himself with this other actor, this other guy who's, maybe his motivations align with Bond's, so they have to sort of, join forces or something or other.
Columbo's my favorite.
Right. I mean, he's great, and he's probably the perfect example of what this film needed. They needed some other guy who also wanted to take out Sanchez, and let's join forces, and you help me with the local, the things that I need that I can't get my hands on, that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's another reason why the Q just seems like the wrong shortcut to take. I mean, again, you're really goofing that character up. And you could also argue that Q is a little more in the field, like Octopussy's a good example of where that happens, but not here. This is not that story,
Not
so
going rogue.
Yeah, no,
No.
absolutely not. And you could have had you missed the opportunity for a much richer story by doing that.
Before we move into the next reason, which is the plot holes, so Joe, we just recorded the Living Daylights episode last week, and at least until Bond teams up with the future Taliban, that has a much more timeless feel to it. We were remarking on that. Like the first half, it's just like this classic Cold War European feel to it.
Yes.
The Miami Vice connection, I know people harp on this to death, but Anton, it's real. Like this is one of, if not the most dated of the Bonds for me.
Yeah, it feels shallow. The wardrobe doesn't help.
No, it doesn't. Again, Living Daylights had a much better wardrobe.
Yeah. I think, to your point, I've made the case before about how I've always felt that each Bond actors, when they do their first film, it's often really good. And I think the reason for that is because it usually causes the filmmakers to sort of stop and take a breath and say, what is it about James Bond that is so unique? And that's usually how you end up with things like GoldenEye and The Living Daylights, and I think to that point, and that's why The Living Daylights feels so good to me, because that's where they took Fleming and really did it the right way. This one, they're kind of, I always felt that the sophomore outings of Bond films tend to kind of get a little wonky, where they're just not, you probably came out with a good one, and now they're not sure where to go. Tomorrow Never Dies, License to Kill,
Man with the Golden Gun for sure.
Golden Gun, absolutely right. It's like okay, well we're back now. What do we do? We just did one and it was really good. Now what do we do?
I think you're right. I never thought about that. I think From Russia with Love is the only exception.
Yeah. Absolutely right. I mean, I think for me, the first four are the Fab Four. Like that's just pure James Bond. That's the early days of James Bond. That's when we're all starting to understand what James Bond is. It all worked.
They didn't even know what they were doing in a way.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's funny when you go back and watch some of those originals. Like they were in the purest form. Like they were doing movies based on books. You know what I mean? Like Fleming wrote the books. We're gonna make the movies about those books. Then after a while, like I would argue, the fifth, You Only Live Twice does this, and then pretty much the entire more tenure, they're just, well, now we got to make James Bond movies. Whether we'll just grab the titles and just make movies.
We have to check boxes.
Exactly right. So it's a whole different world at that point. But yeah, so again, the sophomore outings tend to get a little weird. Like they don't really know what to do next. So they just do some stuff and hopefully it works. Again, Quantum is another one. I feel like that, Quantum followed up a fantastic Fleming-esque, killer takeoff for Craig. And then it's like, well, now what do we do?
It's time to talk about the plot holes.
All right.
You got right into this in the beginning. Was Bond really good friends with Felix Leiter like that?
Yeah, no. a lot of people don't like No Time to Die, but I think that one did a better job if you were going to sort of go down this road of at least trying to show these guys as being friendly. This one doesn't do that. The other big problem I have is that they used David Hedison for this, which I thought was a real wonky move. You know, you pulled out a Felix Leiter from how many years ago, who was James Bond with a different actor. You know, if you're going to do this movie, why not just pull in John Terry again? I mean, I kind of felt like a lot of people were a little underwhelmed or underimpressed with John Terry. But honestly, if you're going to do a movie where the whole premise is based on the idea that Bond is friends really tight with Felix Leiter, you should have brought back the actor from the last film.
Right.
Because at least then you're opening people up to the possibility that they were real chummy and friendly between then and now. This one gives us a whole different Felix Leiter. Again, I think he's 60 years old in this.
Yeah, like
So
I was gonna say, John
Mhm.
Terry at least looks the same age as Dalton. Like,
Right,
Mhm.
that's what I mean. And you could have, I mean, they're trying to pitch this as, you know, it's almost like they're trying to do sort of an undercurrent of Bond was smart enough to know that Felix was making a mistake, but probably didn't say anything, you know, because he knows that, you know, if you get romantic with somebody and you think you're gonna go off and live the good life after the work, the kind of work that we do, you know, that ain't gonna happen. And Bond knows that, but he sort of bites his lip. It doesn't say anything. John Terry could have sold that better. You know, Terry's young. He seems like he's maybe just experienced enough, but not enough to realize he's probably making a mistake, etc. Bond knows a little bit better. Bringing in Hedison, who's easily Bond's senior. You know, he's the guy who should have known better. So yeah, that was a real bad move from the get-go.
we already talked about Bond and Della. That's just weird. I don't know how much. There's nothing else to really say about that. Something else I noticed on the last rewatch. Why does Sanchez only target Felix, not the other DEA agents?
Right.
He doesn't know
Just-
about Bond, so I understand why he doesn't go after Bond, right? But like, why just Felix? He tells Felix right before he drops him in the shark tank, this is nothing personal. It's like, but if he's only going after him, to me, it kind of implies that it is.
Yeah, everything felt very personal. And I think the answer is just very simple. They just needed to set up the plot.
Well, this is the biggest plot hole of all. Sanchez clearly sees Bond in the pre-title sequence on the back of the plane. It never occurs to him to ask the question to Killifer or anybody else.
Right.
By the way, who was the guy that corralled my plane? It wasn't Felix Leiter. I'd like to
Right.
know who that was.
Yeah, right. Yes, and that's another big. You're absolutely right. This is probably the biggest plot hole of all, where Sanchez again knows everyone else involved, or all the they know all of the other players except Bond. It's like Bond has a cloaking device in this. He somehow is able to just walk through the story completely unnoticed. I mean, to the point where, like, I would say this: tell me why Sharky gets killed. Sharky's getting killed because he's helping James Bond. But
Right.
but they know who Sharky is, but they don't know who Bond is. How does that make any sense? I mean, again, Bond is the guy doing everything. To your point, like he literally is the guy on the back of the plane. I mean, if you want to try to make the case that Sanchez can't see exactly who's on the plane, okay, I'll buy that. But if Killifer is paid off, and that's how they make the connection to Felix, well, then Killifer also knows Bond. He knows
Right.
that Bond was essential to him being taken out. So why does Bond get a pass? But we take out Felix, and then we go to we actually take out Sharky. So it's like, how did you skip? How did you? It's like you're jumping from one stone to the next, but you leapt over one to go from Felix all the way to Sharky and not catch Bond in between.
I always imagined there's a deleted scene at the end from that when Bond's calling Felix in the hospital, and Felix is like, "Hey James, do you know where Sharky is? I've been trying to reach him." And James is like, "Ooh, yeah, about that.
Seriously.
I don't know if anyone's told you yet, but yeah, I mean, you covered this brilliantly in your deep dive of this film. I'm just going to run through this. Killifer knows who Bond is. Lupe knows who Bond is, or at least she encounters him in the pre-title sequence and on the Wave Crest.
Mm-hmm.
Dario and his crew know Bond, or they at least know of him, right? They get a look at him in the pre-title sequence. They run into him at the Airplane Roadhouse bar. They know who Pam is, who shows up in Isthmus with Bond, but they're conveniently missing from, I would say, like an hour of the film. Crest knows who Bond is, or has at least seen him stealing the money, as did the entire crew of the Wave Crest, right? They all saw this. They also know about Sharky, but they don't make that connection. Bond shows up in Isthmus, we talked about this briefly, with the exact amount of money that was stolen from the Wave Crest. He uses it to open an account. By the way, Sanchez owns the bank.
Right,
Heller
right.
even calls this out to Sanchez. Now, maybe they don't know that the money was stolen from Crest yet, but they don't make the connection later on. Heller knows who Pam is, and he even sees her with Bond on the casino security cameras. If he was able to figure out Bond's MI6 background, wouldn't that have also connected him to Felix Leiter?
Right. I mean, honestly, every single other person in, like, I think quite literally every other person in this film with a speaking part literally knows who James Bond is, and yet somehow Sanchez never, ever puts two and two together or even raises an eyebrow and say, hey, this new guy who came up out of nowhere, he could be part of the problem. Yeah, it is just bonkers. Like, I mean, honestly, the part when Crest is he knows he's gonna get killed. I mean, he's got the nastiest drug dealer in the world pressing him for information, saying, how did you lose my $5 million? You would think at the very least Crest would say, listen, he's 6 foot tall. He speaks with a Welsh accent. He's this, he's that. Something, to try to say, this is who that guy was. I'm telling you, there was a real guy. And somebody near Sanchez would go, hey, wait a second. We happen to know a guy who fits that description.
Anton, we've covered, I think this is our 17th Bond film at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Is this the biggest plot hole in the entire series?
It is the most egregious. There's no way around that. Like, no way around this plot hole.
Does it bring down the entire film for you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Early in the podcast, we covered Skyfall, which I think the plot to Skyfall is pretty horrible. There's holes all over the place. But Skyfall has some brilliant performances, and it's so beautiful to look at. It's so well photographed by Roger Deakins.
Mm-hmm.
That I can overlook some of it. We're going to get to the production of this in the next film, but this lacks that for me. And that's why I think this film just doesn't have it.
Usually, I mean, you mentioned the really great parts of, despite the imperfections of Skyfall, what really carries this film? And is it enough of a carry to be able to overlook the blemishes? And it's really hard to find that hard carry in this film.
You guys are kind of hitting on the head, where it's like, if I'm not going to watch this for the great locations and the great Bond girls, if I'm not watching this for the incredible action scenes, if you're telling me that I'm watching this story because it's a Yojimbo story, because it's a revenge plot, because well, then you better nail that part, and it just doesn't. I mean, it's not even close. I mean, I will say this. I don't think the biggest problems of the film really hit me over the head the first few times I saw it. Like, when I'm younger and I saw this, I could tell the film was kind of lackluster, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. It's not until repeat viewings that you start to really pick up these things. You're like, wait a second, not a single thing in this story makes sense. So if you're going to try to pull me in because it's a character study or again, a revenge story or something like that, well, then you better give me something to sort of latch on to, but I can't really do it here.
Yeah, and this was something I was telling Pat, is for the most part, any Bond film level of quality, even if something like Man with a Golden Gun, not a perfect Bond film, but has iconic Bond moments. I can't think of a single iconic Bond moment in this film that I'd go back and think that goes in the highlight reel.
There's moments I like, but yeah, let me think about that for a minute. Really quickly, while we're on the plot holes, I have to point this out. Ninjas are Japanese. They're not associated with Hong Kong at all.
It's fine.
It's fine.
Right.
Just saying. So this is also something I was trying to figure this out, and Joe, maybe you've thought about this. So the scene where Sanchez basically has the non-Panamanian military raid the house where Quang and the MI6 guy are like interrogating Bond. Like, were they following Quang before that? Like, how do they just show up there with tanks and stuff?
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, you're right. I've wondered it, but I've come up with nothing. I mean, yeah, that is again. It's just they just know stuff. They just know stuff when they need to know stuff, and it doesn't really make any logical sense why they would just know where to go.
The end where Bond by the way, Bond killing Sanchez is an awesome villain death. I'll give it that.
Yeah.
That's a spectacular stunt. I will
Yes.
give it that, but I have a quibble with it, just like I have a quibble with everything else in this film. When he shows the lighter to Sanchez, Sanchez has no idea what that represents. Does he read the inscription on it? Because he doesn't say. The novelization addresses this because he says, "Remember Felix Leiter," and then Sanchez is like, "Oh shit!" and then he gets lit on fire. But Bond doesn't say that in the film, so how would Sanchez know why?
Yeah, I mean, I'll stretch a little bit and say that I mean they do. The camera zooms in on the inscription. It says "Love Della and Felix." So you could make the case that if Sanchez knows the name Felix Leiter, I mean, not a lot of Felixes in the world,
No.
and when he's torturing Felix, he's literally wearing the tux that he got married in. So I would let that slide and say, okay, look, I mean, it's an inscripted lighter. It's got Felix's name on it. I mean, if he knows enough about Felix, he probably would know his wife's name. So yeah, I would let that slide a little bit, and I would even go as far as to say, even if he doesn't know the lighter, I'll say, well, look, it's the audience does. So it's a tip off to the audience that it's enough of a good moment that I'll definitely overlook any of those sort of quibbles, because
It's
I feel
a
like
great villain death. It really is.
it's a great villain death, and it's poetic in the respect that it ties all of the plot points together. I mean, the irony is that it's almost like when we see the lighter as the audience, it almost reminded us why we're here in the first place. Something that has not been very clear throughout this whole story. It ties together the fact that this was always about what you did to Felix and his wife. So the moment of revenge is sort of crystallized perfectly by using that very lighter. There's actually even a cut scene. I don't know if you've seen this, but where when he first gets the lighter and he lights it, and they all kind of jump back because the flame is too high. So it does call back to that as well. So that to me works. But again, it's like, but you've taken me so far off the path throughout this whole story that it's at the last second you're kind of reminding me of where we are and why we got here. So it's almost too little, too late. But I will say that works.
I'll let it slide.
Am I convincing you a little bit?
You are. You are. It's just it was interesting to read the novelization of this like right after I had watched the movie.
Yeah,
they're pretty close, but I think Gardner was like looking at the script and he was like, I need to fill in some holes here.
Right. That's I tell you, you're actually convincing me now to list. I know I have that novelization as an audio. I should really give that a listen.
It's worth a read. He also wrote the GoldenEye novelization, which is also pretty good. And there's some stuff in the novelization that isn't in the film GoldenEye that it's really good. And I think with Tomorrow Never Dies, that's where Raymond Benson took over. And I think he's been on Individuals You Know's podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's actually one of my first introductions to Bond was reading the Raymond Benson novels as a kid. I really liked what he did with it.
Yeah. Well, that was the golden age. Probably in my lifetime was like the 90s was like the golden age.
Yeah.
The mid to late 90s when just every year there was a new movie every other year. There was a Raymond Benson book, I think at least every year. Plus there was a video game that came out like every 1 or 2 years.
Anton and I have lamented about this. We're like, what happened to the video games?
Right? Oh, yeah. My God. Oh, it's so bad. It's funny too. I don't want to get too off course, but I was talking to some folks over the weekend who have some good inside baseball on a lot of the stuff, and they're really struggling. I don't know if you caught the last. I think it's more of just an app game. It's not even like a full blown video game, but they did a Bond game where Bond was taking out bad guys, but every time he would shoot a bad guy, the bad guy would lie down, and these little Z's would show up over his head, over their heads, to imply he's not killing these baddies, he's putting them to sleep. And everybody's like, wait, what?
I haven't seen that. Oh no,
Uh-oh.
that sounds awful.
It is pretty bad. I mean, I tried to play it for a little while, and I kind of got bored of it, and I said, no, never mind. But that's part of the reason why we're not seeing video games currently. So the filmmakers are wrestling with the violence of James Bond, which, again, don't get me started.
There's been a bit of an interesting resurgence with the 360 game Bloodstone. Do you ever play that, Joe?
Yes. Yeah. Good. I tell you, that one and the Quantum of Solace that came out before that.
Yeah.
Pretty damn good.
Yeah. And it was it's just really like, I just noticed reading a few things recently. It's getting harder and harder to get a copy of Bloodstone. Not that it was already easy, but yeah, there's just definitely a very big appetite for a good Bond game, and that was the most recent one in history that's been on more positive favor with some retrospect.
Yeah, and again, that was a really nice time for video games, because that really did feel more and more like it was just another Craig outing. Like it feels like a movie on its own, you know?
Right.
And they were really doing it right around then.
Remember 15 years ago when we were spoiled and we thought after Quantum came out, we're like, this is great. We're going to get them every other year, just like before.
Yeah. Seriously. Oh my God.
We're spoiled, like you said.
We certainly were.
It's like being a Yankees fan in the 90s. It's just spoiled.
That's right.
It'll always be like this.
Right. Exactly.
Steinbrenner will always spend money.
Just live it up while you can.
I remember when Casino Royale came out. I saw that film and I was so thrilled. And one of the things that literally went through my head was, I don't think I'll ever get a bad Bond movie ever again, because they have found the secret sauce. They know what they're doing now.
Would you say it's been 20 years since a great Bond film?
Ah, boy, that's
depressing.
That's oof.
I like Skyfall, but I'm not putting it on the same level as Casino Royale.
Yeah, no. I look at the Craig tenure as sort of like a big W shape. Big W. It's basically it was up, it was down, it was up, it was down, and I happen to like the last one a lot more than most. But yeah, I mean, Casino Royale, that is not only a great Bond movie, but that's just a great movie, period.
Mm-hmm.
And it's mildly discouraging when you think, like, for people who aren't really into James Bond, it's very easy for me to say, well, then just watch Casino Royale, because that's all of the Bond elements come together perfectly, and it's a current film, so I don't have to try to get people to say, forget about the fact that it's really old and a little dusty and stuff. But then again, when you watch that, all the other ones feel like a letdown after that. So
yeah,
no, I agree with you. Skyfall is a great movie because it's got great style. The look of it is great. The cinematography is great. The music works. But you can't hold that one under a microscope either.
Maybe we shouldn't think about this stuff. Just focus on the production of License to Kill, which is even. So the production of this, we talked about Hedison. I just assumed John Terry was too expensive to bring back because
too busy.
They were trying to cut costs on this. I do think the highlight of the film for me is Robert Davi is outstanding as Sanchez. He's a fantastic villain.
Yeah.
He's a very convincing drug lord.
Yeah.
So,
I was kind of bored to play this. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, great performance. But I wonder if maybe with a different story, could there have been and obviously the answer is yes. Can we have maybe characterized this differently with a different setting? Just because setting it upon a drug lord in the late 1980s dates it back a bit.
You know what it reminds me of? A film that we covered last holiday season, Anton, Die Hard 2. It's a decent action movie, but it does not have, kind of like the parallel to this with Living Daylights. The first Die Hard has a very timeless plot where you're like, okay, they just want to steal hundreds of millions of dollars. And in Die Hard 2, it's like, well, they want to spring this drug lord and then fly him to Cuba, and that's so 1990. It's just kind of, it's hard to watch now a little bit. The drug lord villain here, yeah, but Davi's awesome. He is.
Yeah.
Agreed.
I would compare this to Tomorrow Never Dies, where the baddie in that one is this media mogul, you know,
Carver.
I kind of and I kind of felt like that one that's another example where they're looking around saying, okay, who would a villain be today? You know, who would a modern Bond villain be? And of course, back then it was the media mogul. So all right, fine, but.
It's interesting that you say that, Joe, because I read a lot of stuff about Tomorrow Never Dies online, and they're like, well, the villain is just so timeless. It's so topical in today's thing. I'm like, is he?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't buy that at all. I think he's very of the time.
Well, there's also, it was 97. Well, we don't have to make this a Tomorrow Never Dies episode. If you want to be on for that one, you can. There's no mention of the internet in Tomorrow Never Dies, which is weird because GoldenEye, which came out 2 years before it, the plot heavily involved the internet.
Right. No, that's a good point. That's a very good point. Right. And all of a sudden it's back to newspapers and TV. And it's another reason why it does seem very timely. You know, it's a timely movie. And yeah, I think you could probably make the case that all of the Bond movies, like if you plunk somebody down who's never seen one and said, okay, tell me what year this came out, they'd probably be able to kind of nail it within, you know, degree a margin of error. But this one definitely more than, and again, it's the plot, it's the villain, and it's all the other elements that they threw in too. You know, the music, Michael Kamen, even down to Bond's gun. You know, now suddenly he's using the Beretta. You know, which was
John McClane's gun.
There you go, yep. John McClane, Martin Riggs, everybody was carrying that gun back then. So yeah, this one does scream 89.
It's nice to see Del Toro as Dario. Like that's pretty cool now, especially with how distinguished of an actor he's become. You know, it's pretty rare to see that from a Bond henchman.
Really is climbed his way up through Hollywood.
Yeah. It is pretty fascinating actually, and it's probably one of the few cases where you could see, like, just based on this character alone, you could sort of you could see where his career, you know, went from there.
You can see the talent then, even. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. We were getting into the love triangle earlier. It doesn't work for me at all. And this is the other thing. Look, this is pretty common with Bond girls, so I don't want to single them out just for this movie. Pretty wooden acting from both of them.
Oof. Yeah.
I like Carrie Lowell from Law and Order, but it's TV acting.
Mm-hmm.
The scene where, you know, she's, you know, where Bond confronts her about the Heller and the Stingers, and she's like, and then you did the thing with Heller and it scared him off. It's just, it's not.
It's not good.
I'm sorry. I don't want to be too mean with it, but
I think that to me, that's the lack of direction. I mean, I feel like, you know, it's interesting to me because John Glenn, who directed this film, you know, he did several Bond films, some of which are my all-time favorites, and then there's other ones that just, it almost feels like, is this the same guy? You know, they seem so different. And this is a clear example. And I remember I've heard, I don't know how correct this is, but one of the things I've always heard is that John Glenn, if you ask him today, he thinks his greatest contribution to James Bond is the truck chase from this movie. So he was, which I find very hard to believe. But apparently he was off working on the truck chase. And a lot of these other scenes were sort of, I've heard that even Dalton was sort of directing a lot of this himself because there was just nobody around. And they had all this stuff to sort of fill. Right. And you think this is where the director would be, and you would think his second unit and action directors would be off doing the action stuff. Apparently not. He was just sort of infatuated with this truck chase. So I think that's part of the reason why all that stuff around this time of this movie, it just seems so flat. That, you know, whether it's the two girls, you know, kind of going at each other about, oh, I love James so much, and then Bond busts into the room and does. I mean, that should have been a pretty wild scene. That should have been very emotional, very dramatic, and yet somehow it just ends up feeling so flat, you know? So yeah, you're not pulling performances out of these actors at all. And I feel like you're leaving even Dalton there kind of just dangling. Like,
Yeah, it's not fair to him.
right. I mean, he's there to work. He's there to put in his all. And I felt like he got no support from the direction at all. I mean, again, the sets are boring. The camera placement's boring. All that stuff is just so uninspired.
Well, I hadn't heard that. That if that's true, that makes a ton of sense because I wonder, is that a budget thing? Because we know they were obsessed with trying to save money on this one.
Mm.
And coupled with the writer's strike thing, that I think there's a reason why Wilson never lent a hand towards a screenplay again. Like I referenced this earlier, like what they kind of forgot about Lupe's character,
Yeah.
how she just kind of shows up at the end, and it's like every other Bond movie, you're like, wait, why aren't you dead? Like you should have died earlier in the movie, and he's like, why don't you just marry the president? And she's like, okay, great.
Right. Exactly. Right. And it's frustrating because, again, it's like, guys, you didn't have to do this big, even if they didn't actually bump her off. And I don't mind a film that sort of tries to change it up a little bit because, like, it's to the point where it's like, you know, if Bond's kissing a girl in the first half of the film, you know, watch out because you ain't going to make it till the end. I don't mind that they change that up a little bit. But yeah, to your point is like, but they built up this little love triangle thing just to try to keep things sort of interesting. And then by the end, it's like, oh crap, what are we going to do about that? Yeah. Okay. You go with him. That'll work. Not really.
That's the point you were making about Glenn is baffling to me because I can't figure him out as a director because I think For Your Eyes Only is not only one of my favorite Bond movies, I think it's one of the best action movies ever. It has some of the best, most diverse action I've ever seen in a film, and then he made this.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think, ironically, a lot of the problems that we're talking about with this film are done perfectly in For Your Eyes Only. You know, the Columbo character, the better action scenes. I mean, there's incredible. I agree with you. There's incredible action in that film. You know, I mean, even the rock climbing scene to me, I don't think I would call that an action scene, but the tension there is so good and so well done.
It's phenomenal.
You know? And there's none of that in this one.
The car chase, I think, in For Your Eyes Only, it's my favorite car chase in the series.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And the symbolism of the Lotus blowing up to kick it off.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh my God. I mean, that was really well done. Right. And there's nothing like that. I mean, honestly, if you really sat down and looked at the license, if you looked at License to Kill and said, what are the action scenes in this movie? Well, I would argue it's hard to really call them action scenes. You know, I mean, there's things that are happening, but it doesn't really have momentum. You know, even like the scene where he is under Milton Crest's boat and he's kind of fighting with the scuba guys, and it ends with the water skiing where he takes off with the plane. It's pretty good stuff, but
it's good.
I wouldn't really call that an action beat. You know what I'm saying? Like not like a car chase or anything else.
Yeah. What was the last film we had him on that wasn't Planet of the Apes?
Oh, was it Rising Sun?
Yes, that was.
It was a while ago.
Yeah.
He's like an all-time great character actor. Anytime I see him in a film that we cover on the podcast, I want to shout him out.
Yeah.
Who was he in this movie?
Quang.
I feel like I'm pretty sure I know, but I don't want to.
He plays Quang.
Okay.
He just pops up. Did you ever see the original Mortal Kombat? He's Shang Tsung.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, he's in a lot of stuff. He's just one of those guys. A complete waste of his talents here.
Yeah.
Anton,
I totally agree.
We've been hinting at this for a while now throughout this recording, but for my money, this is the biggest offender in the series. This really looks like it was filmed for television. I think it was progressively getting worse throughout the 1980s. It's a thematically dark movie, but Joe, you were getting into this earlier. Every scene is like weirdly brightly lit. Like there's a giant white light. It's like stage lighting almost.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to figure this out. And as we've been rewatching these, we're more or less covering these chronologically for the podcast. We started with the Craig era, then we went back and started with Thunderball, and we kind of been working our way through. I find the Bonds from the 60s and 70s far better filmed than the ones from the 80s, and I can't quite figure out why.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, and this one, I would argue this is probably the worst offender in that respect,
Yeah.
in the way that it's just so poorly done. If you ever watch any of those videos where they sort of talk about the Star Trek films, and I'm thinking specifically about the like the Next Generation films, they would say it was weird because the Next Generation films were happening pretty much right around the same time that the TV show was happening. So you would take a TV series and they would show the bridge, and the bridge is bright and well lit. But then they would do a movie where it's basically the same bridge, yet it's lit much differently, where it's much darker, the shadows are they're much more harsh, etc. I kind of feel like this is sort of a kind of a good example where they're lighting it for television. I mean, this is probably one of the few times where, again, I hate to keep harping on these really terrible hotel scenes where there's dialogue happening in the hotel rooms.
It looks like a
Um,
soap opera.
it really does. I mean, it's to the point where, like, I feel like any other hotel room in a Bond movie, I feel like looks like it could happen in an actual hotel room. You know, I mean, they're lighting it well, but in like TV shows, you can tell that the set is only one side. Like if you watch like a sitcom from the 70s or 80s, you know that if you were on set and you turned around and did a 180, you know that there's nothing behind you, right? Because all the cameras and all the lighting is facing one direction. I feel like that hotel room is the same way. Where
Yeah.
I know it's not, because I know that there are angles where you can see the different parts of the room, but it looks like everything behind you is not there. Like all the lights are behind you and it's all shining in one direction. You know what I mean? And so yeah, it just always kills me, like how weirdly flat and boring that all looks because of that.
Anton, you know what this reminded me of?
Mm-hmm.
The Hong Kong martial arts stuff from that same time frame. Like this looks very similar to me to Police Story.
Which, if we really also dissected it, it comes down to the money.
In the worst way possible, because
Yeah.
Police Story had like an $800,000 budget. This, at the top of the episode, we were talking about this, Joe. Like, they had the money for the budget here. I couldn't tell you where it went. Die Hard, released the year before, had a smaller budget than this film.
Unacceptable.
This had the same budget as Moonraker 10 years before. We know they had to spend some of the budget to refurbish the studios in Mexico City.
Mm-hmm.
I speculated to you earlier, I think they ran out of money in the third act, but they would never admit that. And this giant 30-pound James Bond archive that I have, that I'm sure you own as well, it mentions nothing about this, but
Yeah.
they were cutting corners, and it's a shame.
Yeah. I think a lot of the problem is, and I feel like I'm telling tales out of school by saying this, but you know, at this point in the franchise, it's really starting to become a business. And I don't know where all the money is going at this point, but it's definitely not all showing up on the screen. You guys probably saw recently, not too recently, last year or year before, the newest Godzilla movie.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
-1.
Yes.
Phenomenal.
Absolutely phenomenal film. And that film cost about $11 million, right?
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Right. And everyone is looking at this going, how does this movie that cost $11 million look so good, like so flawless? Yet in the same year, something like the Flash movie comes out and it looks like garbage. Like it's just a big CGI mess. And by the time you got to the end of that Flash movie, it was just awful. Like even the design of what's happening looks so really weird and just not good. So, yeah, why are some films able to do such incredible work on such small budgets, yet these big, bloated, flabby franchise movies look awful with budgets of like $300 million? So, I think part of that phenomenon is probably happening with License to Kill, where they're hiring all the same people, they rely on the same companies, they're probably promising them, you know, monies for this and the other thing that they might not even need this go around. So yeah, I think there's probably a lot of mismanagement going on in terms of the budget around this time.
Anton and I were remarking on this during the Living Daylights recording last week, how, okay, they got a new Bond. They got a new Money Penny, but not a new M
Mhm.
and not a new Q, and it's the same production crew as the Moore years. I wish Dalton had gotten the treatment that Brosnan got, which is a complete refresh with the crew, the writers, everyone. He needed a clean slate, and he didn't get it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And but ironically too, I think that there's like, put it this way, when you watch The Living Daylights, I don't know why, but I see them when all they're doing is taking a horse-drawn carriage through downtown Prague, and I'm saying, why does that look so cool? Versus, I mean,
Yeah.
that costs nothing. So it also has to do with a lot of, I mean, sometimes it almost feels like sometimes they're working from inspiration, and sometimes it feels like they're not. But I also, I do agree with what you're saying about the treatment that he should have gotten. I totally agree. It's almost like I can't tell what goes on in their minds at certain intervals. It's funny too, because Brosnan, I've always sort of made the case that the Brosnan films, to me, like GoldenEye, feels like sort of an unspoken reboot, as much as people kind of talk about, Daniel Craig was the first official reboot of the series.
I completely agree with you.
Right?
It is a reboot.
Yeah,
GoldenEye, a
but they
soft
just
reboot.
didn't say it.
Mhm.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then Die
So,
Another Day stupidly tied it together with the rest of them.
right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but you're right. But it's like, but when they did GoldenEye, you felt like something was different. Like they were really putting a lot of heart and soul into that movie that just didn't seem to be there for Dalton. And I don't know why, because seriously, Dalton should have been a great. I mean, he is a great James Bond, and he really
Yeah.
should have gotten the support and the material to go along with that.
Do you think it was because I know technically Cubby Broccoli was still in control for GoldenEye, but it was mostly his daughter and Wilson. Do you think that's maybe why?
It's hard to say, but maybe to an extent. I mean, it feels GoldenEye feels fresh as
Yeah.
opposed to License to Kill, which does not feel fresh. It feels very stale. It feels like the powers that be are they're doing just enough. They're just like, okay, well, we got to do a Bond movie. We got to do Timothy Dalton. We got to do, what are we gonna do? And they seem like they're doing just enough to do something that they would call serviceable. Yeah, GoldenEye really, it's a whole different era, and I think there's just enough of the key players in the background who change hands to make it feel like it's a little fresher. Like I think the people behind the cameras of in 1989 are starting to feel their age.
Yeah, I wrote down everyone seemed burned out. Other parts of the production, look, I love Key West. I like visiting there. Pretty unimpressive locations in this. Doesn't
Yeah.
help the movie. It's just everything. It's isthmus, but it's not filmed in Panama. It's supposed to be Panama, but it's not filmed there. We filmed it in Mexico City, but we don't want it to look like Mexico, so let's hide everything on sets that aren't done well. And this is a series that's famous for its production design. Dalton looks awful in this with the hair. I'm not sure what they were thinking. Maybe he insisted on it. And it's the worst wardrobe in the series.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. There's really nothing inspiring about this. Was sort of the era of business casual, and so they can't dress him up as and actually Dalton didn't really seem at home in a suit the way like a Pierce Brosnan does. Like Brosnan looks like he was just born to wear a suit.
Yeah. More too.
Dalton, yeah, exactly. And yeah, they really didn't know what to do with Dalton, I don't think, as far as wardrobe went. But yeah, I completely agree with you about the Widow's Peak and everything, the Dracula look. I just can't stand that. And it's like, guys, come on. I mean, and again, that goes to the tone again, like where I thought like he seemed just right in Living Daylights, and this one, he's so hot. He's just so severe. He's everything is like, I'm just grumpy every single scene. I'm telling everybody to go home. And the Widow's Peak just doesn't help. And he's got the sideburns too that goes with it. It's like, ugh.
There's outfits in the Living Daylights, Anton, that you and I would wear now. There's nothing in this film. Anton has no comment, just shaking his head.
I feel like I'm sucking the air out of the room, and poor Anton's just trying to get a word in edgewise.
No, you're good. You're good. I'm loving every single gem. It's just there really isn't anything else to say that wouldn't feel like he's just bloating everything up like a lot of this film.
I was trying to think of positives. Like, it's the last time we see Rolex in the series. It would be Omega from here on out. We'll see. That's something I always think about too, Joe. Like in the next Bond, it's like, are they going to stay with Omega? I would think.
Unfortunately, I think that they'll probably start with the product placement and work backwards. So if Omega still wants to be part of it, I don't think that'll ever change.
I mean, I like Omega.
Yeah, I do too. Honestly, I am kind of having a kind of a love-hate relationship with a lot of the product placement in the films, because I feel like, put it this way, when I watch Spectre and I see James Bond drinking Belvedere vodka, I'm like, okay, just because Belvedere stepped up and said we're gonna, sponsor the film. So all of those kind of wonderful things, like these little Fleming-esque things, like Fleming liked this, so he wrote about this. He liked this kind of cologne. He liked this kind of aftershave. He liked this kind of vodka. He liked like those things. I feel like are slipping away a little bit, because now we're kind of doing just marketing with different brands. So and a lot of them are really good. They're good stuff.
Yeah.
So, but then there's others where I'm just like, yeah, I'm not sure that I see James Bond with that particular brand.
What I do like about the Craig era is that there definitely seemed to get more into the Britishness of the character. Like, look, we can talk about Tomorrow Never Dies Again, or I guess GoldenEye. It's like, BMW, really?
Right. Yes, I totally agree. I do think that the Craig era, I mean, the last three Craigs were almost love letters to London, so they were they were much more British, and Skyfall especially. I mean, Skyfall is, I mean, that's, they're not even subtle about the messaging in that one. The subtext about the UK and their place in the world these days, and James Bond's place in the world. So I thought that was pretty interesting stuff.
Title song. What do we think?
Not my fave.
Nope.
Yeah,
no, it's not.
You can hear all the influences.
Can you?
I mean, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of it that, especially with all the horns in it, it's heavily inspired by Goldfinger.
I could see that. Yeah. They do they use the song in the score at all?
I think so.
I don't think so. Now that you mention it.
I mean, again, if we want to compare this to Living Daylights, like, my goodness, that Barry score.
Yeah.
Much better.
Every scene has the Living Daylights theme, and those two Pretender songs woven into it. It's magnificent.
Well, honestly, and again, I don't say this as a bad thing, but I mean, at that point, John Barry, he could just phone it in. He knew how to do a score. He was always taking the theme song, and he would usually wrap that into like the love theme or whatever. He would have an action beat that kind of gets played. I mean, and again, masterful. I'm not saying this as a detriment at all. I mean, A View to a Kill is spectacular. The Living Daylights. I mean, I think Living Daylights is one of my favorite soundtracks. I mean, I think
it's amazing.
Such a good score. So yeah, he really had it down pat. He had it down to a science.
John Glenn said he hired Michael Kamen feeling he could, quote, give the closest thing to John Barry, end quote. It's like, well, I'm sorry, John Glenn, but
I mean,
this
come on.
sounds like he was using unused cues from Die Hard and Lethal Weapon.
Yeah, big time. Yeah, there's somebody who could speak the language of music better than me can probably narrow down what that is. But you're absolutely right. There's a very specific sound that you hear in all of his scores, and it's very present here. The one thing I do like about the score, I think he got the gun barrel pretty well. I like how he did the gun barrel, but
it's a unique gun barrel. It's like bum bum.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's almost like I feel like that was the one spot where I kind of appreciated hearing that kind of 90s score. And I think for the gun barrel, it works pretty well. For the rest of it, it's okay, but not something I'm going to listen to. And I even like the Lethal Weapon soundtrack. I remember I used to play that all the time. Like, I used to really like that soundtrack. I mean, I think that's a little more a tribute to the fact that one, I think it was Michael Kamen, David Sanborn, and Eric Clapton who sort of all collaborated to do that one. So it made this really great overall track. But this one, this one's not something I'm going to play in the car too often.
I like Michael Kamen a lot. I just don't think he was suited for Bond. Sort of like what happened later with Skyfall and especially Spectre, were like, I like Thomas Newman. Was he the best composer for a Bond film? Like, I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Well, the Skyfall soundtrack I like a lot. I kind of was the same way. I mean, especially I to this day, every time they announce, who's going to do a Bond score, I'm still sitting here going, well, why not David Arnold? I mean, David Arnold to me he does incredible work.
Why did they replace him?
I haven't a clue. I really don't.
Mm.
I assumed that the director of Skyfall
Mendes
had his own guy, right?
Yeah,
Mendes has his guys that he's comfortable with, but they really should have gone back to him for the last one for sure. But yeah, so I kind of agree with you. I think Cayman is okay, but like I can't imagine the Die Hard score with anybody else. I can't imagine Lethal Weapon with anybody else. But this one, there's nothing in it that's really unique that I think is he doesn't really put his signature mark. Again, I can hear those kind of sounds that I attribute to his scores, but there's nothing really in this film that I would call him putting his personal stamp on it. You know what I mean?
Anton, any thoughts about the soundtrack?
No, I mean, I feel like every nail on the head there. I totally agree. Nothing that has much staying power and nothing very compelling, especially when I just think of how it complements the film as a whole. Just not much.
I don't know what else I have to say about the production of this. I mean, I like the pre-title sequence. I like the skydiving at the wedding. It's cool. There are definitely moments I enjoy, Anton, but to that point you made earlier, is there a signature Bond moment for me? I don't think so. Nothing like in The Living Daylights.
I would agree with that. Sometimes I think of each actor's tenure in terms of if I had to put together like a montage of their best moments. A lot of them you could do a montage of really great stuff. And I feel like there's not a whole lot of things in License to Kill that I would grab.
Yeah.
It would be for me, it would be very Living Daylights heavy and a lot less of License to Kill.
Last reason we can get into, this is pretty well known, but 1989 was a big year for summer blockbusters. This got annihilated at the box office. This was the competition. It was pretty unprecedented. Lethal Weapon 2, Batman, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Ghostbusters 2, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Dead Poets Society, When Harry Met Sally. That's what License to Kill had to compete with when it came out.
I mean,
it opened at number 4.
Look, you look at a lot of those. A few major sequels, some very original storylines, and Billy Crystal. And I feel like going up against that with a storyline around taking down a drug lord I just don't know if the audience was just very excited for it.
Here's some comparison for you, Joe, because you were alive at this time.
Hmm.
The Living Daylights had to compete with The Lost Boys, La Bamba, Stakeout, and then a few weeks later, Dirty Dancing. So, it's no wonder it made a lot more money.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would even challenge anybody to tell me what Stakeout was. I mean, I remember it, but
I had to click on the Wikipedia article to.
Right.
Man, I can't think of the last time I thought about La Bamba.
Yeah, right. But you go back to the 89 thing. Pretty much all of the movies I mentioned are iconic. I don't know if I'd call Ghostbusters 2 iconic, but it's a famous IP.
Yeah.
But everything else on there, like even Dead Poets Society, that's a classic.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think, Ghostbusters 2, Lethal Weapon 2, again, Ghostbusters 2 wasn't really incredible on its own, but it's another situation where it's following up a movie that got a lot of attention, So people were kind of anxiously awaiting to see what this was. So yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's a tough. I would say even if this is one of the better Bond films that we were talking about, they would really have their hands full trying to compete with this lineup.
It managed to crack $30 million in North America, so it didn't even make its budget back in North America. It did better overseas. It's not really a total flop, but it's the lowest grossing in the series. There's a reason why they've never released a Bond film in the summer since. I'm sure the title change didn't help a few months before, but even with that competition, I don't know that this was ever going to make a lot of money. I think the same thing happened to Star Trek V, where it came out right around this shuffle and just kind of got blown away.
I also agree with you too. I think the name change was such a mistake because, license revoked. Every time I hear people talking about how stupid it was to change the name, because people get confused that this movie might be about driving a car and getting your license revoked. I don't think it's that as much as just it. When you hear license revoked, it just invokes, oh shit, I got my license revoked because I didn't pay a ticket or something or other. But with that said, I think they would have been better served with the original title, because I think License to Kill, that to me just says generic Bond film without telling me anything about what the story is about. So I think if people heard license revoked, oh, that's a James Bond movie. Oh, his license is revoked. Oh, that's kind of that you might pop your head up and say, well, what's that all about? License to Kill tells you nothing. Because anybody who's ever heard of a James Bond movie, oh, James Bond 007, License to Kill. Okay, I get it. So it's a James Bond movie. So yeah, it probably did not serve them very well.
Yeah, I mean, I have Last Reason written down. Is Dalton underrated? I think we'd all agree he's not. I think in the Bond community, he's properly appreciated. I don't know if the average person knows the name Timothy Dalton. He's certainly not known like Connery or Brosnan or Daniel Craig. But in the Bond community, I think he's properly appreciated.
I think so too. In fact, honestly, I'm kind of in the minority among some of the hardcore Bond guys in the respect that I don't like License to Kill. Most of them really do.
Yeah.
So I do. Yeah, I agree with you. I think he does get the credit he deserves. I think your average moviegoer may not, even some that are kind of cinephiles and appreciate the classic Bonds. I think a lot of people are thinking, Connery, Brosnan, Craig, and I do think he gets kind of lost in the shuffle when it comes to your average Joe moviegoer, which is kind of unfortunate because I think, again, I really do think Dalton was incredible. And I also think that in the same respect that I always say, the first one's usually pretty good. The second one kind of hits that sophomore slump. The third one traditionally is a lot of people's favorite Bonds. You had Goldfinger, The Spy Who Loved Me, Skyfall. So I think that Dalton's third would have been pretty great. I think it really could have been something spectacular, and it's a damn shame he never got a chance to do it.
We were talking about this on the Living Daylights, Anton. Because he only did two, it's like, what is his signature film? What is Dalton's Bond like? We don't know.
Yeah, and there's no way we can really ever give him that same true, comprehensive, just retrospect, other than just looking at two films, and both of them very different sides of the spectrum. But at least with his performance in each, I really do think that he's still both properly maybe underrated by the to your average moviegoer, but people that know, they really know. That's a very influential Bond, especially the future of the series.
Well, anything to add before we wrap this up and give our ratings?
It was after this mission that Bond retired and went off to become a mayor of a small British town that Simon Pegg then went to become a police officer in.
Oh,
I love it.
That's a great one. I will say this is the last time we ever see Bond smoking a cigarette. You want to talk about an end of an era there for sure.
Last time Bond ripping a cig.
And there's a Surgeon General's warning in the end credits, which I found particularly entertaining.
Seriously.
During that Patti LaBelle song.
Yeah. It is, actually, and this is kind of an end of an era in a lot of ways, too, because this is the last time we saw the M. A lot of the other Gogol, I think, for the last time shows up.
Gogol's not in this.
No, he's not. Actually, no, that's the last one. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
So,
Bobby Brown is M.
Yep, Robert Brown is M. This is his last one.
Nobody's favorite M.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, a few people. It's the last song for a few people, but yeah, in a lot of ways, this is the end of an era.
Well, Joe, as you're the guest, you have the opportunity to go first. We usually do A through F scale here, but you can give it whatever rating you want if you want.
Oh man, this is gonna hurt because this is where I wish I could be a little nicer to this film.
You want to like it. It's Bond.
Yeah, honestly. And I always, it's funny, whenever I do any kind of a ranking, I always try to remind people, I say, I'm ranking it against other Bond films. It's not like I'm saying this is a bad film in general. I'm just saying it's a bad Bond film. There's too many others that are much better. In general, I would call this a C movie. I think this is still better than average, movie going fare. It's got some good stuff in it, but not memorable, at least not for good reasons, and story-wise it's kind of weak. So I would say it probably fits right in with a lot of, if I try to think back to like other movies that I probably went and paid to see in the 80s and 90s, they were just kind of forgettable stuff that I probably forgot I even saw. It's entertaining, it's good stuff. Dalton's pretty good in it. He's very good in it, but they don't really give him a lot to work with. But yeah, all right, I'll give it a C.
Wow, that's a lot kinder than I thought. Now I'm gonna feel guilty for what I'm gonna give it.
If I was, well, I'll tell you this. I'll say this too. If I'm ranking this just against other Bond films, I would definitely have to give it a D, because I think that,
all right,
in terms of just there's too many others that are just much better. It's not even about how bad this is necessarily, but there's too many others that are better. So if I'm ranking it against other Bonds, I got to give it a D. But just in general, I give it a C.
I would say I like Dalton's performance. I like Davi as the villain. I appreciate how much of an outlier it is, but, and this is going to be harsh, objectively though, I think the writing, the characterization, the plot, the supporting cast, the soundtrack, and the cinematography and the overall production are all pretty horrible. Like certainly bottom of the barrel for the Bond series. I think Dr. No is a better looking movie for this, and that had a $1 million budget, and that's saying something. For me, Anton, this just does too many things that I don't want from a James Bond movie. The cheese fest 80s story. It's not particularly humorous. There's not really a lot of one-liners in here that I enjoy, and it just looks so cheap. I don't think it's as bad as Die Another Day. I think that's objectively the worst Bond. This is the rare Bond. I don't really ever revisit this. It's probably my least favorite film in the series. I don't think it's the worst film in the series, but it's my least favorite to watch just because of how much I don't care for the story and what they're doing with it. I put this at a D or a D minus.
Do you want to have a definitive placement on the scale?
Well, let me look at my how do I actually define these two things? So I have D classified as bad with at least one major redeeming quality, and then D minus is horrible, almost no chance of rewatching. I'll say D because I really do like Dalton, and I do like Davi as the villain. I think they are redeeming qualities for this otherwise pretty bad movie.
Yeah. So when I think of where it fits as an action movie, it's just really not comparable. There are just so many more action movies that execute better. There's just so many more movies that execute better from a story point, from a just production standpoint, all the way to how it looks on the screen. And there's no reason why this film should look the way it is, especially considering the prestige of Bond. And we can always go into the politics of why it ended up the way it did. But I think the only thing that really keeps me coming back to this film and like my rewatchability and the overall brings me back to what brings me back to the film is just Dalton. And he only had 2 films. So really I have no other choice than, of course, to watch these 2 films. And if License to Kill is one of them, and I know that I can at least get some enjoyment from being able to see like this small, Dalton chapter, then, so be it. But I don't think that that's enough for me to really add to its entertainment factor. I feel like the entertainment factor is pretty low on the bar for me. Sometimes even with films like this, and when I say like this, feels like a straight to TV movie or just a very generic drug lord driven story plot set in the 80s. I feel like sometimes there's a watchability factor in how bad it is, and sure there's a couple scenes like that, but I don't even think I can do a whole rewatch and laugh at its bad moments. That's going to be saved for View to a Kill. But man, I do think that where I put this is at a D. I would just watch it just to, again, appreciate Dalton. But other than that, there's really not much for me here.
D's across the board.
It's funny. Sometimes if I ask a Bond fan to tell me what his least favorite Bond film is, occasionally I'll get guys who are kind of squeamish about ripping any of the bad ones, and they'll say, "Oh, well, but they're all good. I don't dislike." And I go,
they're not
all right,
all good.
But yeah, I go, but some on your shelf, there are some DVDs or Blu-rays that have the least amount of fingerprints. So just tell me what those are, and then I'll kind of get a little more straight answers. And ironically, I don't dislike this one. As I said earlier, like this one I kind of want to like. There are some Bond films, or just films in general, but Bond also, that literally have scenes that I find downright offensive. Like Quantum of Solace, once I see them dump Mathis in the dumpster, I'm out. I'm done. You know, that really annoys me that they bring that character back just to bump him off so unceremoniously. You know, like you went out of your way to take a character I liked, you know, and just to do that. So like I can actively dislike parts of that film. This one, I feel like, and I know you can't judge a film by its intent, but I do sort of cut this one a little slack because I do feel like the intent was there, you know, and there is this kind of, they're trying to do something different, trying to do something that we haven't seen before, and they're trying to have themes that kind of ring a little deeper than just your average revenge movie, but the execution is where it just falls apart. So again, you can't judge a film by what it wants to do. You know, you can only judge what's on the screen.
Right.
So, but yeah, there is some part of my brain that says, but they were trying with this movie, so I cut it a little bit of slack.
No, that's fair. You can only judge the finished project ultimately, you know.
Yeah.
Well, that's it for License to Kill. Joe, it's been a pleasure.
So much fun, Joe. Love having you on.
Thank you. This was a ball. I really enjoyed the conversation. We got really in depth, and I feel like we left no stone unturned. It was great. So I would thank you guys for bringing me on, and I would love to come back.
We will definitely have you back.
Sweet.
Well, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time, listeners.